I think there's been clarity for years. I'm not going to speak about one. I'm not going to speak to any one matter. I'm not going to get into any one company or one token. But I can't speak about any possible investigations. And I'm not speaking to all the other tokens. But I'm not going to get into any one filing because I'm not going to talk about any one of these tokens. I can't speak to any one case or any one situation.
Could you speak to the Ethereum issue?
I'm not going to go into any one set of conversations between the agency and a company. Not want me to speak about any one set of facts and circumstance. And the laws are clear. The law is clear. I think the law is clear. I think there's been clarity for.
The law is clear. You heard it here first from Gary Gensler. And then coming out yesterday, the SEC announced they were actually wrong calling cryptocurrencies securities, and they promised to not use that term anymore. Anders made a good point. He said, not trying to jump the gun, but so in late August, Alderati, the head lawyer for Ripple, claimed that the SEC's entire enforcement strategy hinges on crypto asset securities being a thing. Today, the SEC put in that there's no such thing as crypto asset securities in a footnote to the Binance case that the SEC has. Plus, Grayscale added XRP back into their trust, which can later be evolved into an ETF. Talked about that in my video earlier this morning. Now Alderati tweets that the Ripple case is over. Not saying that the SEC won't appeal still, but there are sure some suspicious signs of something going on, and I agree with that. In gold, all-time highs. Never been this price, $2,585 per ounce. And this just goes to show the general state of the economy and how much out of control inflation is getting. People are looking for safe places to store their purchasing power in gold and precious metals. And now in the discussion, even people are talking about Bitcoin being a good store of value. But yeah, gold, all-time highs. And here's a clip right here from Black Swan Capitalist. He says, he's right. Rigging the dollar and debt market will only accelerate the shift towards solutions like XRP, where central banks can tokenize and settle their debts, adding additional value to XRP's use case and its price. Get with the program.
If the rigging here of the debt market and the dollar being a unit of debt, we haven't seen anything yet. Now, with regard to that, you know how I operate, people. I tell you exactly what I am doing. Do you see this? I did buy more XRP. Added to my position in XRP. I would suggest if you're, look, I'm not telling you guys and girls what to do, but I would suggest that you ponder having some exposure to the cryptocurrency space here. Again, you know how I feel about XRP. I've spoken about it a million times. Rigging.
The real world asset tokenization argument is coming more to the forefront every single day. And I do believe in the future that could potentially even be bigger for Ripple than cross-border payments because everything is going to be tokenized on the blockchain. We've seen big investment managers, we've seen big banks talk about this, and the technology is already being adopted at the early stages, and it's only going to get bigger. Can you believe this? Scam Bankman Fried filed an appeal to overturn FTX fraud conviction. Now, if he gets away with this, after how much money he's scammed from people, it's just an example of how the elites have the ball in their court when it comes to making mistakes like this. Similar to the 2008 financial crisis, many more arrests could have been made, many more lawsuits could have happened, but these big banks are in bed with the people that are doing these regulations, and they don't always get the same treatment as a regular person like you or me. A good thread here about how utility will increase the XRP price. Here's a simple breakdown. In every bull run cycle, only one thing drives these prices. It's called liquidity. However, let's focus on the long-term utility aspect of XRP and how this utility will drive price. It's kind of funny but true. It's still liquidity that drives the prices in the future because an increase in utility translates to an increase in liquidity. All right, they're mutual benefits. Based on supply and demand principles, there's only 100 billion XRP in total. Utility and adoption growth. XRP's price will rise with institutional adoption. The simple equation, the more volume on the XRP ledger, the higher the price. And as institutions use XRP for transactions, the supply available to the public will shrink. These banks and big institutions are going to need a big bag of XRP to facilitate their transactions at scale and they're not going to be looking to just buy and sell it and trade it. They're going to be looking to just get a bag of it so they can then leverage the technology behind it to do these fast, cheap transactions. Although there isn't enough net new inflow right now to significantly boost the price, increasing transaction volume will drive demand over time, which is investable since the banks will always choose the best tech to ensure they're competitive. We've had Citibank already come out and say they're ready to use XRP. They're just waiting for clarity. Institutional demand. Institutions will buy, hold, and use XRP as a tool, not for trading. Since XRP has a limited supply, institutions will retain it, reducing availability for retail trading, which will gradually push prices higher. Let's be honest. Why the heck would they ever buy it, put it back on the market? They wouldn't. On-demand liquidity and liquidity pools. As liquidity pools unlock trillions of dollars and provide liquidity, the demand for XRP will increase, further driving up its price. In summary, Economics 101, supply and demand. The supply right now is a little bit ahead of the demand, but it takes time to innovate in big businesses, especially these large banks that have been around for over 100 years. It takes time, okay? But it's just a matter of time before it does happen. In this video right here I watched this morning, it's from Milton Friedman, one of the world's most famous economists, talking about the causes of the Great Depression and how the Federal Reserve ties into it. Take a listen.
That 9 out of 10 of them would say, well, of course, the Great Depression was a failure of private business. It was due to an overextension, overspeculation in the 1920s, or it was due to an excessive concentration of wealth in the hands of the wealthy at the expense of the poor in the 1920s, or it was due to speculative investment abroad, or whatnot. But it was a failure of private business, and government had to step in order to rescue private business from its own failure. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The Great Depression was produced, in my opinion, and I may say this is not a random opinion. I will be glad to refer you to a several hundred-page book in which it is documented. I won't tell you who the author is. Mr. Eccles did that. It was produced, the Great Depression was produced by a failure of government, by a failure of monetary policy. It was produced by a failure of the Federal Reserve System to act in accordance with the intentions of those who established it. It was produced by a failure of the Federal Reserve System despite the presence of knowledge on the part of many of the people in the system about the right course of action. It's interesting to speculate for a moment about why this myth is so widespread. The answer is really very simple in this case. Private enterprise has no press agents. The free market has no press agents. The government has a great many press agents. The Federal Reserve has a great many press agents. And the Federal Reserve, of course, would never admit, never proclaim that it produced the Great Depression. On the contrary. And again, I don't mean to be criticizing individuals. We're talking about the way institutions operate. You and I are the same as all the rest of us. We're all the same. The hardest thing in the world is for anybody to admit that he made a mistake. If any one of us makes a mistake, we can always find somebody else to blame. And if you read, as I have for my sins had to read, the annual reports of the Federal Reserve System over a 50-year period, there's only one element of humor that lightens that task, and that is the cyclical fluctuation in the powers of the Federal Reserve. In a good year, when things are good, when the economy is booming, you will read that the Federal Reserve, by its wise policy, by its efficacious management of money, has produced this fine situation. However, let things get bad, and all of a sudden the tone of the annual report is different. Then you discover that despite the best efforts of the Federal Reserve, outside forces combine to produce difficulties. Even at the depth of the Depression in 1933, when, in the spring of that year, the Federal Reserve System which had been established in order to prevent banking panics and keep banks from closing, when the Federal Reserve System itself closed its doors, and you had a banking holiday for 7 days. And when, over the previous 3 years, a third of the banks of this country closed their doors and went broke, because, in my opinion, of the poor policy followed by the Federal Reserve System. Even in 1933, if you read the annual report, you will discover how much worse things would have been if the Federal Reserve hadn't behaved so well. Now, as I say, I don't blame the members of the Federal Reserve for that. Any one of us would do the same thing. We have to find somebody to blame. But as an objective scholar, I can tell you what the facts are. The facts were that from 1929 to 1933, the total quantity of money in the United States, the amount of currency, the amount of bank deposits, what Mr. Eccles referred to as M2, that total amount of money declined by 1/3. The total number of banks went down by 1/3. And why did the quantity of money decline? It declined because the Federal Reserve System failed to prevent the decline. The Federal Reserve System could have prevented the decline at all times. There never was a moment during that period when the Federal Reserve did not have the power to prevent the decline in the quantity of money. If it had prevented the decline in the quantity of money, you might still have had a recession, but it would have been a garden variety recession. It would have been over in the middle of 1930 or early in 31 at the latest. It would not have been the major catastrophe, not only for this country, but throughout the rest of the world. Moreover, this is not only hindsight. At all times, the people at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and at a number of other banks were pleading with the Federal Reserve Board in Washington to do the right thing. At all times, there were people in Congress who were arguing that the Federal Reserve System should take a different course. At all times, there were outside commentators. One of the Canadian banks was particularly prescient, but there were other commentators who were pointing out the disastrous effects on the American economy of the restrictive policies that the Federal Reserve System was following, and which was permitting and facilitating a whole series of bank runs. So the Great Depression was not produced by a failure of business. On the contrary, it was produced by a failure of government, and a failure of government in an area in which responsibility had been assigned to government since the founding of this country. The Constitution of the United States. It gives Congress the power to coin money and set the value thereof. And it was in the management of this fundamental function of government that government failed and produced the Great Depression. We have learned from that failure. The Federal Reserve will not fail in the same way again. This time it will fail in a different way. This time it has been failing, not by producing a Great Depression, but by producing an inflation. Because just as you will hear the story that it was business that was responsible for the Depression, so you will today hear the story that it is labor and management that are responsible for inflation. It is the same kind of a myth. Inflation is made in one place and one place only, Washington, D.C.
So one of the best economists ever said it very well. Let me know if you knew about this already. Thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great Saturday, great Sunday, great start to your week. Until next time.